never supposed to meet. But one last-minute phone call, one desperate favor, and two lives on opposite ends of the world collided in a way neither of them could have predicted. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about healing, about courage, and about how sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let someone in. I don't care if you have to pull someone from the janitor's closet. I need a date by 7. Vivian Reese snapped her phone shut with a crisp finality that echoed through the marble halls of Reese Capital. She didn't glance up as her assistant Harper scurried out of the office, high heels clipping against polished floors like a metronome, counting down toward disaster. Tonight's gala wasn't just another networking event. It was Vivian's trial by fire, her first major appearance since her father's death and her unexpected ascension to CEO. The board wasn't convinced she could lead, especially not alone. Appearances mattered. And nothing screamed unstable like showing up solo, especially when half the room was hoping she'd fall flat on her designer stilettos. Harper returned 10 minutes later, eyes wild. "There's a driver downstairs. Caleb Shaw. He just dropped off a catering invoice and he's clean. Tall. Not terrible looking." Vivian arched a perfectly groomed brow. "Not terrible looking, he reads, like actual books, spoke in full sentences, and he held the door for me." Vivian stood smoothing her blazer over a sleek black jumpsuit. That makes him a rare breed. The first time Caleb Shaw laid eyes on Vivian Reese, she was descending a spiral staircase like a verdict. Cold, immaculate, untouchable. She didn't smile, didn't greet him, just looked him over like he was a rental car someone had reluctantly accepted at the counter. "You," she said, stepping into the back of her armored town car. "Congratulations. You've been promoted to arm candy." Caleb blinked. "Excuse me, we'll be at the Whitaker Foundation Gala in 25 minutes. Don't talk, don't wander, don't drink anything you can't pronounce. This is not a conversation, it's an arrangement." Caleb said nothing. He closed the car door and eased into traffic, his hands steady on the wheel, but his jaw set. The gala was held at the Langford Hotel, a glass palace bathed in soft gold lighting and string quartets. The moment they entered, all eyes turned. Vivian, always composed, leaned in just slightly and whispered, "Smile like you belong. Don't make me regret this." Caleb offered a slow, dry smile. "That makes 2 of us." They made their way through the crowd, venture capitalist foundation chairs, old money patriarchs whose cologne cost more than Caleb's rent. Vivian greeted each of them with mechanical grace, but something about the room's energy felt hungry. And then they reached him. Harlan Whitaker, silver-haired, wolf-eyed, and the single largest investor in Reese Capital. "Vivian," he said, kissing her cheek. "And who's this?" She didn't hesitate. "This is Caleb Shaw. He's assisting me on our latest initiative." Harlan's eyes narrowed, amused. "Ah, from the field. A man of action. Tell me, Mr. Shaw, what's your opinion on legacy leadership? Useful or outdated?" Vivian gave Caleb a sharp look. "Don't you dare speak." But Caleb met Harlan's gaze without flinching. "Legacy is only useful if it doesn't make you blind." The room quieted. Even the violins in the corner seemed to pause. Harlan raised a brow. "Is that so? History's full of kingdoms passed to unworthy heirs. Sometimes what you inherit is less important than what you build after." A beat of silence. Then Harlan laughed low and slow. "Interesting. Very interesting." Vivian's fingers tightened around her clutch. Her face remained neutral, but her knuckles turned white. Back in the car, the tension was suffocating. "You were supposed to be quiet," Vivian hissed, her voice ice over steel. "Invisible. That was your one job." Caleb stared straight ahead, his voice calm. He asked a question. "You think this is a debate club? You embarrassed me in front of the most powerful man in that room." He turned to her at a red light, meeting her fury with quiet resolve. "No. I made him listen. There's a difference. Vivian inhaled sharply as if his words had struck something uncomfortably close to truth. Pull over, she said suddenly. We're on 5th now. Caleb pulled the car to the curb. She opened the door without another word, stepped out in her heels, and slammed it shut. He didn't expect to see her again. The next morning, Caleb sat in the break room of the service depot drinking lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, scrolling through job listings. His daughter June needed dental work he couldn't afford. He'd already sold his old guitar, skipped meals, canceled the heating repair. Then his phone vibrated. Unknown number. I'll be at your building in 10. Don't make me come up. Vivian was waiting in a silver car, this time in the passenger seat. When Caleb approached, she rolled down the window. You still read books. He tilted his head, wary. Only ones without your name on them. A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. I want you to come back. Not as a prop, as a consultant. The board wants a community initiative. I need someone who knows what community actually means. Caleb crossed his arms. Why me? Because you made Harlan Whitaker pause. That's not easy. He studied her for a long moment. And what happens if I speak again? Vivian looked him dead in the eye. Then speak only when you have something worth hearing. He smirked. I usually do. That was how it began. Not with affection, not with understanding, but with a reluctant truce forged in fire between a man who'd lost everything but his integrity and a woman who had everything but trust. Neither of them knew it yet. But the real story was just beginning. The ballroom shimmered with soft amber light chandeliers hanging like frozen stars above murmuring guests. Caleb stood beside Vivian, a step behind, just as she had instructed. He wore the same navy suit she'd rented for him last time. Nothing new, nothing fancy, but it fit, and more importantly, it fit him. Quiet, unassuming, present. Vivian, in contrast, was every bit the ice-sculpted queen of Wall Street. Her dress, a sleek black silhouette, clung to her like armor. Her red lipstick wasn't color, it was warning. Tonight, she murmured, adjusting the diamond pin on her lapel. We're here to present confidence, not novelty. Do what you do best. Stay silent. Caleb's eyes flicked to her. Is that what I do? Best. She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know how. As they approached the table reserved for top-tier donors, Vivian's hand brushed lightly against Caleb's forearm. Not out of affection, but strategy. Appearances mattered. She was still performing. So was he. But when they reached the circle of tailored suits and polished egos, something shifted. Harlan Whitaker was there again, seated like a lion at the head of the table, surrounded by lesser animals. To his right, Judith Stone, chairwoman of the largest philanthropic fund in the state. To his left, Emerson Hale, tech mogul turned investor. And across from them, all two empty chairs. As Vivian and Caleb sat, Harlan offered that signature half-smile, the kind that knew things he hadn't said yet. Vivian, Mr. Shaw, good of you to join us again. Caleb nodded politely. Thanks for having us. Vivian froze for half a second. He'd spoken, out loud. Already? Harlan's eyes gleamed. Tell me, Mr. Shaw, since our last meeting, I've been thinking about what you said, about legacy and blindness. He leaned forward, elbows on the linen-draped table. So, let me ask you this. What do you see when you look around this room? Vivian shot Caleb a warning glance, subtle and sharp as a blade. But Caleb didn't flinch. He looked around slowly. The glasses, the watches, the way everyone measured each other with polite smiles and thinly veiled suspicion. He returned his gaze to Harlan. I see builders who forgot what it feels like to build with their own hands. A silence rippled out like a pebble dropped in still water. Judith let out a soft laugh. Well, that's a poetic way of calling us out. I didn't mean it as an insult, Caleb said calmly. Just an observation. There's nothing wrong with rising until you forget what you're standing on. Vivian's fork clinked against her plate. She wasn't eating. Harlan nodded slowly as if savoring the words. Spoken like a man who's lost something. Caleb didn't smile, or like someone who knows what it means to fight for what you haven't lost yet. Vivian exhaled sharply through her nose. Enough. She turned toward the table with her practiced grace. Shall we move to the presentation? But the mood had already shifted. Judith leaned forward, chin resting on her knuckles. Actually, I'd like to hear more. Mr. Shaw, what's your take on the new social initiative Vivian is proposing? Vivian froze. This wasn't on the agenda. She turned to Caleb, eyes issuing a silent order, don't. But Caleb looked at Judith, then slowly back at Vivian. He didn't ask permission, just spoke. I think it's the right idea, he said, but it's only half the story. Community programs fail when they treat people like recipients, not partners. If you want real change, you have to invite the people you're helping to the planning table, not just hand them leftovers after the gala. No one said a word. Even the waiter mid-pour of a vintage Cabernet paused. Vivian's voice was ice wrapped in velvet. That's not how we discussed framing it. Caleb turned to her, voice low but steady. You wanted impact, not a pitch. Her lips parted, ready to retaliate, but something in his tone stopped her. He wasn't undermining her. He was risking for her, and it stung because the room was eating it up. Judith raised her glass. I'll drink to that. Later that night, they rode home in silence. The city blurred outside, the window lights flashing across their faces like truth-telling strobes. Vivian stared out the window, arms crossed. You hijacked my meeting. I answered a question. You made me look unprepared. Weak. Caleb turned, voice calm but firm. You looked human. She scoffed. That's not what they want. Maybe not, but it's what they'll remember. Silence stretched between them. Caleb looked away out toward the skyline. After a long beat, he added softer this time. You don't always have to fight alone. Vivian. She looked at him, then really looked, and something in her eyes flickered. Not vulnerability, not yet, but maybe the exhaustion of carrying too much for too long. Good night, Mr. Shaw, she said as the car stopped at her brownstone. But just before she stepped out, she hesitated, turned. You're right about one thing, she said, voice lower now, heavier. People remember what you say when you're the only one who dares to say it. Then she was gone, heels clicking into darkness. That night, Caleb sat at the foot of his daughter's bed, brushing a loose curl from her forehead as she slept. He thought about legacy. Not the kind printed on plaques or stock certificates, but the kind left behind in words, in risks taken, in people changed. In the quiet, he whispered mostly to himself, maybe it's not about being heard, maybe it's about saying the right thing, even if no one's listening yet. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a truth was taking root. She wasn't just a CEO, and he wasn't just a driver, and this was no longer just a job. The silence in Vivian's office was sharper than any argument. It was the kind of silence that hummed just under the surface like a wire pulled too tight. The city lights outside her floor-to-ceiling windows flickered against the glass, but she didn't move. She stood by her desk, arms crossed, spine rigid, her expression a mask carved from porcelain and restraint. You made a mockery of the table, she finally said, not looking at him. Caleb stood across the room, still in his suit from the gala tie loosened just slightly. His posture was steady, but his jaw clenched, his hands in his pockets, not out of calm, but to stop them from shaking. I answered a question, he said quietly. No, Vivian turned to face him, her eyes flashing. You delivered a sermon. He didn't flinch. They asked. I told the truth. Vivian walked toward him, slow, deliberate. You're not here to tell the truth, Caleb. You're here because I made a calculated decision to appear grounded, relatable, safe. Not insubordinate. Insubordinate, Caleb's voice rose just a notch. "Vivian, I wasn't representing you. I was speaking as me. There's a difference." She exhaled sharp and fast. And yet the headline tomorrow will read, "Vivian Reese loses control of her own narrative again." A pause, the kind that says more than shouting. "You embarrassed me," she added, barely above a whisper. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand." Something in her eyes flickered. Not satisfaction, regret maybe, but buried under too many layers to name. He walked to the door, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. "I'll have my badge turned in by morning," he said without looking back. Vivian didn't stop him. Back in his small two-bedroom apartment in Queens, Caleb stood in the kitchen staring at the fridge door. It was covered in his daughter's drawings, crayon flowers, crooked hearts, a stick figure holding a balloon labeled Dad. June sat at the table with her tablet legs swinging hair in two messy puffs. She looked up as he poured water into the kettle. "Did the fancy dinner go okay?" Caleb forced a smile. "It went." She tilted her head, studying him the way kids do, sensing what adults try to hide. "Did she like you?" "I don't think that was the goal," he said softly. June chewed her lip. "I liked her." Her eyes were sad even when she smiled. That stopped him. "She smiled?" he asked. June nodded. "Only a little, but it was real. I think people forget how to smile for real when they get too busy pretending." Caleb crouched beside her chair and brushed a curl behind her ear. "You're too wise for 6. She grinned. "I'm almost 7. He hugged her tightly and she leaned into his chest. And somewhere in that quiet moment a thought struck him harder than Vivian's dismissal. He hadn't failed. He'd said what mattered. And maybe that had never been wrong. The next morning, Vivian sat in her office again, staring at a notification blinking on her screen. Her PR team had sent her a link, the driver, who spoke truth to power and made the room listen. It had gone semi-viral overnight. An anonymous guest had recorded the exchange. It had over 1.2 million views. The top comment read, "This man said what CEOs have forgotten. Give him a mic, not a steering wheel." She slammed the laptop shut. Harper peeked into the office. "Everything okay?" Vivian didn't answer. She stood across the room and stared out at the skyline. "He said he'd have his badge turned in by morning," she murmured. Harper hesitated. "Do you want me to block him from the building?" Vivian turned. "No, let him come." But Caleb didn't come. Instead, 2 hours later, Harper entered quietly, holding a sealed envelope. This was just delivered. Vivian opened it. Inside was Caleb's ID badge and a folded piece of lined notebook paper written in uneven blue ink. It was a letter, but not from him. "Dear Miss Vivian, my daddy says sometimes being honest makes people mad, but he told me that it's still the right thing. I'm sorry if he made you mad. He only talks like that when he cares a lot. Thank you for letting him wear the fancy suit. I liked your earrings. Love, June, age 6 and 3/4. Vivian sat down slowly. She read it twice, 3 times, then closed her eyes. There it was, the thing no analyst could prepare her for. A child's handwriting, sincere, unaffected, pure, and more honest than any quarterly report she'd ever read. Hours passed, and then, as dusk painted the sky in strokes of gold and purple, Vivian did something she hadn't done in years. She got in her own car, no driver, no assistant, and drove across the bridge to Queens. Caleb opened the door wearing sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt. He blinked, stunned, as if seeing a ghost. "Vivian," she held up the letter. "Your daughter has better people skills than your entire board." He stepped aside, speechless. She walked in, glancing around the modest space. Lived in. Clean. Filled with the kind of warmth no penthouse could buy. "She wrote that on her own?" Vivian asked. Caleb nodded. "Didn't even show it to me until she asked if we had a stamp." Vivian set the letter down on the counter. "I shouldn't have let you walk away," she said. You didn't stop me, Caleb replied, calm but pointed. I was angry and afraid. That surprised him. Afraid, he echoed. Yes. Vivian looked up, her voice softer now. Because you said what I wanted to say but didn't know how. Because the moment you opened your mouth, they stopped seeing me. They saw you, and I didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. Caleb studied her, seeing not the CEO but the woman beneath. Maybe they finally saw both of us, he said, and that scared you even more. Vivian didn't deny it. Instead, she whispered, I need your voice, Caleb. Not for appearances, not for optics, for truth. I need someone who reminds me why I took this job in the first place. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. I'm not a puppet, I know, and I won't lie to make people comfortable. Vivian smiled just barely. Thank God. And so, without fanfare, without contracts or cameras, the man she'd dismissed became the voice she'd learned to trust. Not because he was polished, not because he was perfect, but because he never once tried to be. The next morning came with quiet light filtering through the blinds, casting long slants of gold across Caleb's kitchen floor. He moved like a man, trying not to disturb a fragile dream, careful with every step, as if the wrong movement might shatter the strange, surreal turn his life had taken. Vivian Reese had sat at his kitchen table. Vivian Reese had apologized. And she'd said the words he'd never expected to hear from anyone in her world. I need your voice. He turned the coffee maker on and let the hum of it ground him. It wasn't just that she'd come. It was how she'd looked, exhausted, raw, and real, as if the weight she wore so well in public had finally cracked beneath its polish. June padded into the room in her pajamas, dragging her stuffed bunny behind her. Is the fancy lady coming back? She asked, yawning. Caleb chuckled. Maybe. Why? June shrugged. She looked lonely. I think she wants to be someone else when no one's watching. He paused. What do you mean? I don't know, she said, simply climbing into her chair. She smiled like it hurt. Later that afternoon, Caleb stood at the edge of a conference room on the 42nd floor of Reese Capital. His ID badge had been reactivated. His name, this time in print, was listed on the agenda, Caleb Shaw, Consultant Community Engagement Strategy. Vivian stood at the head of the table, speaking with two board members, her posture straight, her tone composed. But when her eyes met his, there was a flicker of something quieter, something that didn't need words. After the meeting, she found him by the window. I want to build something real, she said without preamble. Not for the press, not to appease the board, but for people like you and your daughter. Caleb nodded slowly. Then let's start by asking the people we're trying to help. She blinked. You mean bring them in? Yes. Let them shape the project. Otherwise, it's just charity, and charity without dignity becomes performance. Vivian exhaled as if something deep in her chest had just released. You speak like someone who's lost things, she said softly. I have, he replied, and I've seen what happens when people think throwing money at problems is the same as solving them. The next few weeks passed in a blur of planning sessions, site visits, and long hours spent around tables cluttered with coffee cups and community reports. Caleb was no longer an outsider. He was integral. And Vivian had stopped pretending she knew everything. They disagreed often, but their disagreements had weight, respect, substance. You can't put a park in that neighborhood, Caleb argued one afternoon, frowning at a map. There's no trust there yet. People will think it's a PR stunt. Vivian crossed her arms. Then what do you suggest? He pointed to a school 2 blocks over. Partner with them first. Start a mentoring program. Show up. Stay. Then talk parks. Vivian nodded slowly. Stay, then build. Got it. He smirked. Wow. You listened. She shot back dry, I pick my battles. But the smirk remained. One evening, after a particularly long day in the field, they rode back to the office in silence. The car hummed softly beneath them. You ever miss teaching? Vivian asked suddenly. Caleb stared out the window. Every day. Why'd you stop? He hesitated. Budget cuts. Then June got sick, and life doesn't wait for dreams to reschedule. Vivian looked down at her hands. I used to paint, she said. Watercolor. Nothing groundbreaking, but it made me still. Caleb turned to her. What stopped you? She laughed almost bitterly. Expectation, deadlines, becoming someone people respect even if it means forgetting what makes you feel alive. A long pause passed. Maybe Caleb said gently, You don't have to choose. Vivian looked at him, eyes softer now. That sounds like hope. He smiled. Sometimes it is. The next day, Vivian invited him to a board luncheon, a small event informal meant to introduce the investors to the new initiative. Caleb hesitated. Vivian, you know they'll see right through me. She shook her head. They won't, because I'll tell them who you are before they get a chance to assume. He stared at her, moved more than he'd admit. Why do you trust me? He asked. Vivian's voice dropped. Because you don't need this job to be whole, and that's exactly why I need you near it. The luncheon was held at a private garden atop a midtown building, ivy-covered, quiet, absurdly beautiful. The kind of place Caleb had only seen in magazines at dentist offices. Vivian stood to introduce him. Most of you know Caleb Shaw as the man who said something bold at our last gala, she began. What you don't know is that he's the reason this project might actually succeed. Because he reminds me every day that leadership without empathy is just ego in a better suit. She looked at him then, not with condescension, but with respect. When Caleb stood, the room quieted. I used to teach history, he said, and one of the things I told my students was, empires fall when they forget why they rose. He paused. We rise not because of strategy, but because of people. When we stop listening to them, we start falling quietly. Silence. Then slow, deliberate applause. That night, back in her office, Vivian sat on the edge of the couch, heels off, hair down. Caleb stood by the window, hands in his pockets. That went better than expected, she said. You spoke from truth, Caleb replied. That always lands. She looked up at him. You're changing me. He smiled almost sadly. You were already changing. I'm just the mirror. Vivian was quiet for a long time. Then, what if this gets harder? It will. What if we fail? He turned to her, eyes steady. Then, we fail trying to matter. And in that moment, no contracts were signed, no declarations made. But something unspoken had shifted again. They weren't just allies now. They were something more. Two people quietly choosing in a world of noise to build something real, brick by fragile, honest brick. Caleb adjusted the collar of his shirt as the elevator doors opened to the executive floor. It still felt strange being here among steel and glass suits and strategy where voices were polished and words were used like currency. He stepped into the hallway, greeted with polite nods from assistants who still looked at him like he didn't belong, like he had wandered into a room meant for someone else. He wasn't offended. He'd seen this look before, when he was the only black teacher in a private school, when he showed up at a fundraiser without a title, when he asked for help at the pharmacy with a daughter in his arms and no insurance card in his wallet. He was used to being underestimated, but he was no longer interested in shrinking to fit rooms that didn't know what to do with him. Vivian met him near the boardroom with 2 coffees in hand. You're early. He accepted the cup. You're welcome. She smirked. No one makes me feel underdressed in my own building. Except you. Caleb glanced at his sleeves. It's the thrift store charm. No, it's the confidence. She said it almost like a confession. Inside the room, the department heads were gathered around a sleek table, glossy reports in hand. Vivian introduced Caleb as lead consultant on community integration, and not a single eyebrow raised. She'd made space for him, and she'd made it safe to take it. The meeting began. Vivian outlined the next phase of the initiative, partnering with 3 underserved neighborhoods for a pilot mentorship and skills training program. Caleb chimed in with practical logistics, transportation, language, access, building, trust before engagement. Then came Andrew Sloan, VP of Operations, slick as oil in a Navy Italian suit. "And what's our projected ROI on this charitable pursuit?" he asked, voice smooth but loaded. Caleb looked at him evenly. "What's the ROI on someone choosing not to steal because they found purpose instead?" Andrew chuckled. "So we're saving souls now," Vivian cut in. "No. We're investing in people so they don't get lost to systems we've ignored." Andrew raised a brow. "And who evaluates success?" "Vivian, your driver." A beat of silence. Caleb didn't flinch. He leaned forward, voice calm. "Success isn't always in numbers. Sometimes it's in a kid going back to school, a mother starting her own business, a name not forgotten by the system." Andrew's smile tightened. "I prefer metrics." Caleb nodded. "And I prefer impact." Vivian didn't smile, but her eyes, sharp and steady, were with Caleb, not Andrew. After the meeting, she found Caleb in the rooftop garden, standing alone with the skyline behind him. "That was bold," she said. He took a sip of coffee. "Would have said more if I wasn't afraid of getting escorted out again." Vivian chuckled. "He's threatened. You didn't flinch." "I've had worse said to me by men with less expensive shoes." She studied him. "You know, when you talk, people don't just listen. They lean in, like they want to believe you." Caleb shrugged. "Maybe they're just tired of corporate rehearsals." Her voice softened. "I'm not." He looked at her. "You're not what tired of it?" "Not anymore. Not when I have people around me who remind me what truth sounds like." A quiet fell between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Like silence that held hands with meaning. The next morning, Caleb brought June with him. Her school had a teacher workday, and his babysitter had a family emergency. He had almost canceled, but Vivian had texted him early. "Bring her." "My office has snacks." June walked into Reese Capital like she owned the building. Wearing her yellow rain boots and a pink glitter backpack, she waved at every assistant and called the elevator buttons magic portals. Vivian met them in the lobby. "Well," she said, kneeling, "I've seen CEOs who carry less authority." June giggled. "I'm her assistant today," she declared, pointing at Caleb. Vivian grinned. "Then I should warn you he's a bit stubborn." June whispered loudly. "I know, but he always listens if you have gummy bears." Vivian laughed, the kind of laugh Caleb had never heard from her unrestrained light young. "Duly noted," she said. Later that afternoon, while Caleb met with the outreach coordinators, June sat in Vivian's office coloring. Vivian, buried in quarterly forecasts, stole glances at her from time to time. At one point, June looked up. "Do you work all the time?" Vivian paused. "Most of the time." Why, Vivian thought. Then said, "Because I'm trying to fix something my dad left behind." June tilted her head. "Did he break it?" Vivian smiled, sad and sweet. "Not on purpose." "My daddy fixes stuff too," June said proudly. "Like when our heater broke and he used a spoon and tape." Vivian laughed softly. "That's impressive." June leaned in conspiratorially. "He also fixed my heart once. When it hurt, he just hugged it better." Vivian froze. That hit deeper than she expected. "What about you?" June asked. "Who fixes your heart?" Vivian blinked. Her voice caught. "I'm still figuring that out." June nodded solemnly. "That's okay. Sometimes hearts just need rest. Not fixing." Vivian looked at the little girl, the 6-year-old prophet in glitter and boots, and felt something inside her shift. That night, after June had fallen asleep in the back seat, Caleb walked Vivian to her car. "She likes you," he said. Vivian smiled. "She's unforgettable. She sees things," Caleb said quietly. "Always has." Vivian looked at him, and for the first time the words came without armor. "I forgot what it felt like. To be seen by someone who doesn't want anything." Caleb nodded. "Maybe that's why it's worth staying, even when it's messy. Especially then." A breeze passed between them, soft and warm. Vivian looked down, then back up. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm more than someone's daughter. And now he asked. She met his gaze steady. Now I want to become someone's reason. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But something passed between them in that moment, something more binding than physical closeness. It was the beginning of trust. The quiet agreement that two people from different worlds could stand in the same room, and maybe build a new one together. It was well past midnight when the last light in Reese Capital finally dimmed, except one. The boardroom. Vivian sat alone at the far end of the polished table, surrounded by abandoned documents and untouched espresso. Her laptop blinked in front of her, filled with red lines and investor concerns. She rested her elbows on the table, pressing her fingers to her temples. The weight wasn't just from the numbers. It was from expectation, from legacy, from the eyes of a board waiting for her to break. The door creaked open. Caleb stepped in quietly, still in his rolled-up sleeves from the community site visit earlier that afternoon. He hadn't planned to come back to the office, but something had told him she'd still be here. He didn't speak at first, just stood there. Vivian didn't look up. If this is another "you need to sleep" intervention, save it. He walked over to the table and slowly took a seat across from her. "You look like you're trying to hold up the sky." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Almost. I keep thinking if I solve this one spreadsheet," she murmured, "the company will suddenly remember I belong here. You think approval comes in cells and margins." Vivian looked up, tired eyes meeting his. "It's easier to measure than trust." Caleb leaned forward. "You don't earn trust with spreadsheets. You earn it by showing up when it's inconvenient, and standing still when everything pushes you to run." Her lip trembled, but she caught it before it became emotion. "The board is getting anxious. Investors are asking if I'm focusing too much on humanitarian distractions." He frowned. "You mean the work that's actually changing lives?" Vivian nodded. "Sloane's feeding the idea that I'm soft, that I don't have the edge to scale." Caleb exhaled. "You don't need an edge. You need roots." She looked at him for a long moment. "You keep saying these things that sound like poetry and feel like medicine." Caleb shrugged. "I used to write speeches for a living." Vivian blinked. "Really?" "Yeah. 8th graders. History class. Had to make war sound inspiring without traumatizing them." A quiet laugh escaped her lips. It was small, but real. Then she stood and walked toward the window, arms crossed, shoulders tight. "Do you ever get tired? Of being questioned? Of being the one people think doesn't belong in the room?" "All the time," Caleb replied. "But I stopped asking for a seat. I started building my own table." She turned, facing him, the city lights behind her like fire. "I don't know how to build my own table," she admitted. "Everything I have was passed down name company expectations. Sometimes I wonder if anything I do will ever truly be mine." Caleb stood. He approached her slowly, respectfully, and stopped just a foot away. "It will be," he said. "If you decide to build with people instead of for them, that's when it stops being legacy and starts being life." Vivian's throat tightened. "I'm scared, Caleb." He didn't say, "Don't be." He said, "Then do it scared." 2 days later, they visited the Eastbrook Center, one of the proposed sites for the community initiative. It was a rundown neighborhood hall with a leaking roof, mismatched chairs, and kids running barefoot outside with makeshift soccer balls. Vivian had never been in a place like this. And it showed. She stood straight, hands clasped, lips pressed in a firm line as she followed Caleb inside. The director, Ms. Lena Carver, welcomed them with a warm, tired smile. Her handshake was firm, her voice steady. "We've had a lot of folks promise to help," she said, leading them through peeling hallways. Most of them just wanted the photo op. Vivian didn't respond immediately. She was absorbing everything, the cracked tiles, the outdated posters, the smell of effort without resources. "We're not here for a photo op," Caleb said gently. Lena looked at him, then at Vivian. "We'll see." Inside the multi-purpose room, a group of teens sat in a circle discussing upcoming GED classes. One of them, a girl named Amira, asked bluntly, "Are you the rich lady that owns the company with the glass building?" Vivian hesitated. "Ah, yes. Why are you here?" Vivian opened her mouth to give the rehearsed answer, but something in the girl's voice stopped her. She glanced at Caleb, then back at Amira. "I'm here," she said slowly, "because for a long time I thought power was something you had to protect. But now I think maybe the real kind is something you're supposed to share." Amira blinked. "You don't talk like other rich people." Vivian gave a soft smile. "That's probably because I'm still learning how to speak like myself." That night they walked back to the car in silence. As Caleb opened the passenger door for her, she stopped him. "Wait," she said. He turned. Vivian looked at him, eyes softer than they'd ever been. "Thank you for not letting me hide behind my walls, for walking me into rooms I never thought I belonged in." He gave her a half smile. "You weren't hiding. You were waiting. There's a difference." She looked down. "You make me braver, Caleb." He tilted his head. "You've always had courage. I just reminded you where you left it." They didn't touch, but their eyes held long after words had finished speaking. That weekend, back at home, June sat at the kitchen table with crayons and construction paper. Caleb watched her stirring pasta on the stove. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She smiled. "A castle." He chuckled. "Whose?" She looked up at him. "It's Miss Vivian's, but this time it has windows, so she can see the people outside, and they can see in." Caleb stared at her stunned. "That's a beautiful idea," he whispered. June shrugged. "Everybody needs sunlight." And in that moment, Caleb knew something he hadn't dared name before. Vivian Reese wasn't just changing a company. She was learning how to open her castle. And maybe he was the one holding the key. The morning light was soft when Caleb stepped out of the subway holding 2 coffees and a folder under his arm. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian board meeting at 9. "Just listen, then tell me what I should have said after I say too much." He smiled, thumbs a reply. "Deal. I'll bring caffeine and quiet judgment." The mood at Reese Capital had shifted lately. There was warmth where once there had only been glass and cold. Staff smiled at Caleb now, not out of politeness but recognition. He wasn't the driver anymore. He was part of something. But beneath that warmth, something else stirred. A chill that wasn't quite visible but could be felt like a draft under a locked door. And it had a name. Andrew Sloan. Vivian was in the boardroom when Caleb arrived. She stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled up, hair and a low-knot notebook in hand. Her energy was electric, purposeful. "Today," she began, "we're not talking about projections. We're talking about people. If we want to survive in this market, we don't just need expansion, we need trust, community, humanity in our model." Some nodded, some smiled politely. Andrew Sloan just crossed his arms, his eyes calculating. After the meeting, Caleb caught up with her outside the room. "You were fire," he said. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Too much." "No," he replied. "But be careful when you burn too bright, moths start circling. Not all of them want the light." She tilted her head. "Andrew, he didn't answer. He didn't have to." Later that afternoon, Caleb was in the file room looking for old reports when he overheard something he wasn't meant to. 2 men, voices low behind the frosted glass wall. One of them was Andrew. Secured the agreement. "The consortium is in. Reese won't see it coming. She hasn't signed off yet. She doesn't need to. Not until we've locked the terms. Once the money's on the table, she'll follow." A beat of silence. "Her soft community campaign's great for optics, but we need a bigger play. These investors want fast returns, and we're sitting on the real estate to do it. We liquidate one underperforming initiative, reallocate, boom. 18% profit increase in 2 quarters. Caleb stepped back, heart racing. They were making a deal. Behind her back, and worse, using her initiative as the scapegoat. That evening, Vivian was still in her office, flipping through grant proposals when Caleb walked in without knocking. "Do you trust me?" he asked, eyes locked on hers. She looked up, surprised. "Of course." "Why then come with me?" "Now, no questions." She paused, studied him, and nodded. He took her to the parking garage where his truck waited. No black town cars, no tinted glass, just Caleb and the truth. They drove in silence until he pulled into a quiet street and parked outside a community-run family center, one of the first beneficiaries of their new initiative. Inside, children painted on easels. A young father read to 2 toddlers. Volunteers served food to a small crowd. Vivian watched it all unfold. "Why are we here?" she asked softly. Caleb turned to her. "Because this is what they're trying to erase." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I heard Andrew. "They made a deal. Behind your back. Investors. Speed profit and cutting this entire project to fund expansion." Vivian stared at him, stunned. "No, they wouldn't. They already did." Her hands trembled at her sides. She turned to the window again. The center was small. Cracked walls, second-hand furniture, but it breathed with dignity. "These people believed in us," she whispered. "I told them we were different." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Then be different. Fight back." She looked at him then, and there was fire behind the disbelief. "Do you have proof?" He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Audio. From the file room." Vivian took it slowly, like accepting a weapon she never wanted to use. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" she asked. Caleb hesitated. "Because part of me thought, maybe you already knew. That maybe this was just another chess move." She flinched. "I didn't," she said. "I swear to you, Caleb, I didn't." He nodded. "Then prove it. To me. To them. To yourself." Back in her apartment that night, Vivian sat at her kitchen table with her father's framed photo beside her. For years, she'd lived under the weight of his legacy, his empire, his rules, his silence. But this betrayal didn't come from the world outside. It came from within. And for the first time, Vivian Reese wasn't afraid of breaking the system. She was ready to rebuild it. The next morning, she walked into the boardroom like a storm in heels. "I want to talk about transparency," she began, plugging in the flash drive. Andrew stiffened. The room fell into a hush as the audio played, his voice clear and undeniable. When it ended, Vivian stepped forward. "You didn't just go around me. You went around every community leader, every volunteer, every life we touched, and you thought I'd stay silent." Andrew opened his mouth. Vivian raised a hand. "No, you don't get to speak first anymore." She turned to the board. "This initiative is not a side project. It's the spine of our future, and if anyone here can't see that, you're welcome to hand in your resignation today." Silence. Then, slowly, Judith Stone, one of the senior board members, stood. "I've doubted you before, Vivian, but today I see your father's fire, and your own vision." One by one, the others followed. Andrew Sloan did not. He left the room, alone. That night, Caleb found her on the rooftop garden, the city stretching out like a promise behind her. "You didn't flinch," he said. Vivian turned to him, a small tired smile playing on her lips. "I almost did, but you didn't." She looked at him. "No more shadows, Caleb. No more hiding. I'm going to lead this company with both hands, and if they try to take it from me, you'll let them try," he finished. Vivian stepped closer. "I don't want to build this alone." "You're not." And as the wind danced around them, something unshakable settled between them. Not romance. Not yet, but partnership. Rooted, earned, unbreakable. The elevator doors opened with their usual soft chime, but Caleb's steps were slower this morning. The halls of Reese Capital, once intimidating, then familiar now, carried a new tension, the kind that settled between shoulder blades before a storm. Vivian hadn't spoken to him since the board meeting, not because she was angry, but because something had shifted. She was winning, now finally, and the world around her could feel it. The headlines, the donors, even Judith Stone's reluctant nod of approval. Vivian Reese had taken control of her father's legacy, stared down betrayal, and walked out standing. But Caleb knew the cost of rising too fast. He'd seen it in teachers turned administrators and students who lost their compass chasing perfection. When you ascend too quickly, you start mistaking applause for clarity, and clarity was starting to blur. Vivian stood at the head of the war room table speaking to a team of strategists and advisors about the next phase of expansion. Caleb took his usual seat near the back, not to hide, but to observe. Lately, he had found himself speaking less and listening more. Not because his voice wasn't welcome, but because he wasn't sure it was still heard. "We've been approached by a new partner," Vivian said, clicking to the next slide. "The Claiborne Group. They're offering $30 million in matching investment, contingent on a small revision of governance within our social impact arm." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "What kind of revision?" someone asked. Vivian glanced at the page. Advisory influence. Nothing binding. A seat on the review committee. Caleb sat up straighter. "So they want a say in where the money goes." Vivian hesitated. "It's standard with high-value partnerships." He leaned forward, voice low but firm. "It's leverage." Some heads turned. The room went quiet. Vivian's jaw tightened. "We've vetted them. It's not a hostile move." Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. If you hand them a key now, don't be surprised when they own the house by next winter. She stared at him silent. He stared back. And for the first time since they began working together, it wasn't the world against them. It was them against each other. After the meeting, he followed her into her office. "You didn't tell me," he said. Vivian tossed her notepad onto the desk. "I didn't need to. You're not on the legal team." "No," he said, "but I'm the one who's been in those neighborhoods. I'm the one who sat with a mother who needed a grocery voucher and dared to believe it might come. If they start rerouting funds, they won't," she snapped. Caleb stepped back. She closed her eyes, took a breath. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." "No," he said quietly, but it was honest. She looked at him, then tired and guarded. "I'm doing what I can to protect what we built." He shook his head. "No. You're protecting what you think you've earned. And in the process, you're forgetting who you were before this all started." Her voice dropped. "I haven't forgotten." "Yes," he said, his voice soft but painful. "You have. Because the woman I started working with would have burned the deal before letting strangers touch the heart of this program." Silence. Vivian turned away back to the window. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she whispered. "They look at me like I'm still wearing my father's name like a borrowed suit. I need this deal to show them I belong." Caleb's next words were like a stone dropped in still water. "You're trading integrity for validation. And once you do that, you'll never stop." She spun around, eyes flashing. "You think I'm selling out? I think he said you're scared." And making fear look like strategy. It hurt. She didn't say it, but he saw it. And then quieter. "You know, June asked me yesterday why you hadn't come around lately." Vivian blinked. "She asked?" "She misses you," Caleb said. "She said you smiled less the last time you saw her. Said maybe you forgot how to play." Vivian sat down slowly. "I haven't forgotten. I just don't know how to balance it all." Caleb looked at her with an ache he couldn't hide. "Then stop trying to be perfect," he said. "Start being true, even if it means losing the applause." The next day, Vivian signed the initial agreement with the Claiborne Group. She didn't tell Caleb. He found out from a forwarded email chain. That night he didn't call, didn't text, didn't drop by, and neither did she. Silence grew like ivy between them, quiet, stubborn, and hard to remove. 2 days later, Vivian sat in a corporate lunch with Claiborne's representatives, her smile polished, her eyes dim. She barely tasted the food, barely heard the speeches. When one of the executives leaned in and said, "We'll want to discuss the viability of reallocating funds from your Eastbrook site just for Q4 projections," she felt something in her chest break. She nodded politely, then excused herself. She drove straight to Eastbrook. No cameras, no security detail. She walked through the entrance with her heels clicking like guilt. Inside, Amira, the same teenager who once asked, "Why are you here?" saw her and smiled. "You came back," she said. Vivian nodded. "I had to." They sat in silence on a wooden bench covered in peeling paint. After a while, Amira asked, "Why do people always come with big promises and then disappear?" Vivian didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "Because sometimes even good people lose their way." Amira looked at her hard, then find it again. That night, Vivian stood outside Caleb's apartment building. He opened the door, his face unreadable. She didn't say anything right away. Then, finally, "I signed it." He didn't blink. "I know," he said. Vivian stepped forward. "It was a mistake. Not just the deal. Not telling you." He nodded slowly. "But I'm going to undo it," she said, "even if it costs me, even if the board turns." Caleb crossed his arms. "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I'd rather fail with you beside me than win without knowing who I am." The silence between them broke not with noise but with something far more powerful. Understanding. And this time, when he opened the door wider, it wasn't just to let her in. It was to let her belong. The sun had just begun to break through the fog when Vivian stepped into the boardroom, not as the heiress of a billion-dollar legacy, not as the polished executive in navy silk and pristine heels, but as a woman who had finally chosen her line in the sand. There were no cameras, no curated smiles, just her voice and the truth it carried. "I've called this meeting," she began, her tone steady but stripped of bravado, "because I need to correct a decision I made. One that, if left unchecked, will compromise everything we said we stood for." The room shifted. Board members glanced at one another, sensing what was coming. Vivian slid the printed agreement across the table. "The Claiborne deal is off. Effective immediately." Andrew Sloan, though no longer a formal board member, had taken the liberty of attending as a consultant. He smirked. "You do realize the penalties for backing out? You'll lose half your matching funds and possibly breach clauses that I'm aware Vivian cut in." Then, why she looked him dead in the eyes. "Because no deal is worth selling pieces of myself I'll never get back." A hush fell. She didn't need applause. She needed clarity. And she had it now. After the meeting, she found Caleb waiting in the hallway, leaning against the cool marble wall like he had all the time in the world, but none to waste. "You did it," he said, voice low. Vivian nodded. "I burned the bridge." "Some bridges need fire," he said. "So no one can walk back into what broke them." She chuckled faintly. "That sounds like something June would write in a crayon poem." He looked at her eyes, soft. "She gets it from her dad." There was a pause. Not heavy, just full. "I'm scared," Vivian whispered. "You should be," he replied. "Only fools aren't scared before a leap." "Are you scared?" she asked. Terrified, he smiled. "But I trust you." And for the first time in her life, Vivian realized trust wasn't about being strong, it was about being seen when you're not. That weekend, Vivian invited Caleb and June to her townhouse. It wasn't a formal dinner, no staff, just 3 place settings, paper napkins, and a lasagna she almost didn't burn. June came in, running backpack, bouncing eyes wide. "You have a piano," she gasped. Vivian laughed. "You play, I pretend to. Well, that's how most greats begin." June ran to it immediately, plunking out a clumsy but enthusiastic tune. Caleb watched with an amused grin. "I hope you're ready for 3 hours of that," he said. Vivian smiled. "Honestly, I've never been more ready for anything in my life." Later, when June curled up on the couch under one of Vivian's old cashmere throws, Caleb stood at the window with her. "She fits here," he said. Vivian nodded. "So do you." Caleb turned to her, voice softer than it had ever been. "This isn't just a nice evening, Viv. This feels like home, and that terrifies me." She swallowed. "Me too." The next morning, Vivian met with Judith Stone over coffee at a quiet cafe. Judith, sharp-eyed and old-school, sipped her espresso slowly. "You made quite the stir," she said without looking up. "I know." Judith set her cup down. And yet. No one stormed out. No one sued. The sky didn't fall. Vivian smiled faintly. "Maybe I've been afraid of shadows that were never real." No, Judith corrected, they were real. But they weren't permanent. You just needed to remember you could turn on the light. Vivian looked at her, startled by the unexpected kindness. "Why are you still here, Judith?" "After all these years," the older woman considered her answer. "Because I waited a long time to see a Reese fight for people instead of profit. I'd like to stay long enough to see what you build next." That evening, Caleb walked Vivian through the garden he'd been tending behind the community center. A small patch of soil, nothing fancy but flowers bloomed, tomatoes peeked from vines, and the earth smelled like something was finally alive. "I started this when I thought you were done with the initiative," he said. "I needed to believe something could grow even if the top dried up." Vivian knelt by a rosebush touching a new bloom. "I was drying up, too," she whispered, "and I didn't even see it." He crouched beside her. "I saw it," he said, "but I also saw something else." When he picked a petal, gently laid it in her palm. "Resilience. You weren't breaking. You were bending so you could bloom." Her breath caught in her throat. They were inches apart now. The late spring breeze wrapped around them, fragrant with earth and possibility. Vivian looked at him, eyes shimmering with something unspoken. "I don't want to be the woman who only knows boardrooms and legacy," she said. "I want to know what it feels like to be part of something real. With you." Caleb touched her cheek softly. "Then stop reaching for what's perfect, and hold on to what's true." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But when their foreheads touched and their hands entwined, it was more than a promise. It was a beginning. It was past midnight when Vivian Reese stood alone on her father's penthouse balcony 36 floors above a city that never stopped pulsing, never stopped asking more of her than she had to give. The lights below glittered like false promises. Empty noise in a world that had once convinced her she was only as valuable as what she could control. But tonight, everything was quiet. Until she heard the knock. She turned slowly, not surprised to see Caleb standing at the doorframe, jacket and hand breath fogging in the spring chill. "I figured you'd be up," he said, stepping out beside her. She didn't speak, just offered him the coffee mug in her hands. He took it, sipped, grimaced. "You still don't put sugar in anything," he muttered. She smiled faintly. "Some of us like the truth undiluted." He leaned against the glass railing, looking out over the city. "You told the press today you were selling this place." She nodded. "I am." His brow lifted. "That's a move." "It was never mine," she said quietly. "It was his. Everything in here still smells like legacy. And regret." Caleb was silent for a moment. "Do you ever miss him?" he finally asked. Vivian exhaled the question, slicing through a wound she never let anyone touch. "I miss who I thought he was," she said. "But the real version, the man who built an empire but couldn't say, 'I'm proud of you,' without making it a transaction, I don't know if I ever had him." Caleb looked at her then, not like a man seeing a woman break, but like someone witnessing a rebirth. "You know," he said, "people always assume pain either hardens you or ruins you. But sometimes it just strips you down to your truth." She looked away, blinking fast. "I wanted him to see me," she said. "Not the numbers, not the headlines. Me. The little girl who stayed up practicing her speech for his boardroom and fell asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. And now, she whispered, I want to stop proving anything to ghosts. The next day, the community center was hosting a spring festival, Vivian's idea. No press, no branding. Just families' food, trucks' music, and messy chalk drawings on the sidewalks. Vivian arrived in jeans and sneakers, no makeup, her hair tied back in a ponytail. No one recognized her as the CEO who once graced Forbes covers, and for the first time in her life, she didn't care. June ran up, hands covered in paint beaming. "Miss Vivian, I made a rainbow tree." Vivian knelt. "A rainbow tree. Can I see?" June grabbed her hand and dragged her across the lot to a giant cardboard mural taped to the side of the center. In the middle of wild brushstrokes and swirls, a crooked tree reached to the sky in a dozen mismatched colors. "It doesn't look real," June said proudly, "but it feels happy." Vivian stared at it. "It's perfect," she said, "like someone painted hope." June looked up. "That's what Daddy said you do. Paint hope, but with money." Vivian blinked, and for a second her throat burned with emotion she couldn't swallow down. "Your dad says that." "Only when he thinks I'm not listening," June whispered conspiratorially. Vivian smiled and ruffled the girl's hair. "He's smarter than he lets on." Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline casting gold on everything it touched, Caleb found Vivian seated on the wooden steps behind the center. Her shoes were off her toes, buried in the grass. Her face, so often composed, was soft with something new, peace. He sat beside her. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" he asked. Vivian shook her head. "Not in a million board meetings." Caleb glanced at her. "Do you regret anything?" She was quiet. "I regret the years I spent being everything but real." Then, looking at him, "But I don't regret you. Or her. Or this." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think I'd get another chance to build something." Vivian's gaze was steady. "You didn't find this, Caleb. You created it. With kindness. With grit. With every choice to show up when no one else did." She paused. "You taught me that integrity doesn't wear suits. It wears dirt under its nails and still holds the door open for someone else." He chuckled, then grew quiet. "Do you think people like us get to have happy endings?" Vivian turned toward him fully. "No," she said. "I think people like us earn them. One hard conversation, one vulnerable moment, one brave step at a time." Caleb's hand found hers, fingers intertwining without hesitation. And then she leaned her head on his shoulder, the kind of gesture that says more than 3 pages of dialogue ever could. They sat like that two souls who had been broken in different places, now healing in the same one. That night, back at her soon-to-be empty penthouse, Vivian stood in front of the last thing she'd kept, her father's old briefcase. She opened it slowly, half expecting it to be full of cold files and unspoken expectations. Instead, inside was a handwritten note yellowed with time. "Vivian, I never told you how proud I am because I didn't know how to love you without conditions. But you were always more than a legacy. You were the reason I tried. Dad." Vivian pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping silently down her cheek. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't closure. But it was enough. She folded the letter, placed it in her own bag, and zipped it shut. Tomorrow she would sign over the deed to the penthouse. Tomorrow she would walk into a new office, one built near the people she was trying to help, not above them. And tomorrow she would wake up in a small brownstone in Brooklyn, with Caleb in the kitchen and June coloring rainbows at the table. For the first time, she wasn't chasing power. She was living in purpose. And it was more than enough. The first morning in the brownstone was chaos, the kind of beautiful lived-in chaos Vivian had never known she needed. Pots clanged. Toast burned. June sang a made-up song about pancake mountains while spinning in circles with a spatula in her hand. Caleb tried and failed to keep syrup from spilling on the dog they didn't technically own yet. Vivian stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair still damp from the shower, laughing so hard her ribs ached. There were no staff, no assistants buzzing in with urgent folders, No sterile silences echoing down gilded halls, just mismatched mugs, overgrown herbs in the window, and two people who made this old house feel more alive than any penthouse ever could. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "So this is what home tastes like." Later that week, the new community initiative launched under a different name, Reese Renewal, not to glorify a family legacy, but to signify something reborn. The ribbon-cutting ceremony wasn't flashy. No media circus, just families, volunteers, and the quiet hum of hope. Vivian spoke first. No teleprompter. "When I was a little girl," she began, "I used to think strength meant never needing help, never showing weakness, never failing." She paused, her voice steady but rich with feeling. "But I've learned that real strength is asking for help when it's hardest. It's owning our mistakes. It's choosing to keep showing up, especially when the world expects us not to." She glanced at Caleb standing near the garden with June on his hip. His eyes met hers, steady, warm, and full. "And it's loving people deeply," she said, "even when love demands everything we thought we couldn't give." The crowd clapped. Some wiped their eyes. But the truest applause came from the silence afterward, the kind of silence that holds reverence, not absence. That night, as they walked back to the brownstone, Caleb turned to her under the street lamp. "You scared?" he asked. Vivian smiled. "Every day." He raised a brow. "Even now. Especially now," she said. "But I've learned fear doesn't mean don't move forward. It just means the next step matters." Caleb nodded. "Then let's keep walking." 2 months passed. The garden behind the center bloomed like it had something to prove. June won a poetry contest at school with a piece titled "Where Hope Sleeps." Vivian was invited to a national forum on ethical philanthropy and declined, choosing instead to attend a parent-teacher conference. People began whispering about her again, but in a new way. Not Vivian Reese, the heiress, but Vivian Reese, the one who stayed. One evening, Caleb found her on the rooftop terrace he'd built from scrap wood and flower pots. She was barefoot again, hair in a loose braid, reading a book of Langston Hughes aloud to June, who had fallen asleep halfway through the second stanza. Caleb watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You look happy." She glanced up. "I am. You look free." Vivian closed the book eyes soft. "I didn't know I was in a cage until I stepped outside it." He smiled. "Well, you've built something better now." Then quieter. "Do you think there's room in this something for me? For real?" She stood across the space between them. There always was. He touched her face. "I'm not offering fairy tales. Just pancakes on Sundays, dance parties in the living room, and someone who'll never let you fight your battles alone again." Vivian laughed, tears brimming. That she whispered sounds a lot better than a fairy tale. And this time when they kissed, it wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was slow, certain, earned. Weeks later, on a warm Saturday morning, Caleb found a small velvet box tucked inside his tool chest, wedged between a screwdriver and a note that read, "Let's build forever. One screw up and sunrise at a time." When he looked up, Vivian was standing at the doorway. No grand gesture, just a hopeful smile and a heart finally wide open. They didn't have a traditional wedding. They had a backyard dinner with fairy lights and wildflowers. June was the one who officiated, proudly announcing, "Today we become a team. Forever and no takebacks." And when they danced, it wasn't to a curated playlist. It was to the sound of their laughter, the beat of a second chance, and the promise that home isn't a place, it's the people who make your soul feel less alone. As the sun dipped low that evening, casting honeyed light across the porch where 3 chairs rocked in quiet rhythm, Caleb turned to Vivian, her hand warm in his. "You saved me," he said. Vivian shook her head. "No," she whispered, eyes glistening. "You reminded me I was worth saving." And in that stillness, just before the stars blinked into being, they both knew they hadn't just survived their storms. They had become each other's safe harbor. And that was everything. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts about this story. If this journey touched your heart, made you reflect, or simply brought a smile to your face, don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in second chances.